So, yeah, this morning looks a little bit different, like Trez no doubt said already. We are right bang in the middle of our Storehouse series, and I have the pleasure of asking some questions of our lovely panel this morning. So it might be helpful if I just introduce each of them initially, and then I've prepared some questions so we can really dig in and ask them just a little bit about what's going on in the life of the church and finances right now. So first up, we got John D, who is our church warden. For those of you who don't know, we've got Joel Goodlett, who is here representing the PCC. Yeah, whoop is good. And we've got Kat Mearden on the end, the very beautiful Kat, who is co-lead pastor, has been doing a lot of the work around the building stuff that we've got. So each of them will have their own input to give as we go through questions this morning. But I think we're going to start with John, if that's okay. And before we get into the church stuff, John, I'd love you just to share a little bit about what generosity or giving has looked like in your own life over the years.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we're going to get to talk about church stuff, but first of all, where does that money come from? So we're all in different contexts in life. So what does giving look? So my giving journey, I'm 42 now, it's gone through several seasons. But I remember early days with my mum when I was about 13, 14, we used to do chores around the house, and which is great way to get to boost your pocket money. Mine would be ironing. With household of 6, I was the oldest of the kids, and so I could also help out, but I could also get a bit of dosh on the side. So this was a good one. And then my mum introduced me to tithing, right? So we're a Christian household, and then she said, well, actually, look, over this wasn't just a one and done conversation, but I was 13, 14 years old, starting to build my list of mowing the lawn and helping out with other chores, and then starting to build on top of my pocket money. Mum said, look, actually, do you want to think about where that has come from? Where's that opportunity to work come from? And do you want to think about giving some of that back to what God has given you? So I was like, what's this all about? Anyway, so if you're not familiar with some of the church sort of philosophies or suggestions on how to give, tithing is one of those, and it's based on a 10% of what you receive, the first 10% going back towards what God is serving God. So that might be giving into a church or other avenues. And I was like, right, okay, that's right. I've earned a fiver. 50p goes in that little giving pot. Not sure about this. And as I got older and my income went up, I thought that the bigger, this 10%, all right, it's still 10%, but it's getting larger. So I took up a lifeguarding job. I'd pick up maybe £100 for a monthly shift. I'm like, I've got to but a tenner goes in that box. So in that moment of being a young lad with the opportunity to earn money, I thought, you know what, it's really started to ground me. These conversations with Mum, and as I grew in my faith in God, ground me that actually I'm fortunate to have the means to be able to earn, and actually to who is it that actually has lined up that opportunity to learn, and ultimately it's God and it's his opportunity. So giving something back in that context was a bumpy journey, but a good one, and it's kept me grounded. And there have been other seasons that we've gone through where, as I got married and our household has grown, where you think actually that commitment to give something back to God has sometimes come with quite a big rub.
Yeah, stretching. That's been my experience too sometimes. Has there been one specific moment that changed your perspective on giving?
Yeah, I can. Well, I run a team, and one of our team on that she was 25 at the time, and her husband died in an accident, and they had a newborn. And so we were already, so Georgie and I, in our context, we were 2 incomes. We had young kids in nursery, so our outgoings were really quite high. And my colleague was just going through the homeless situation experience. So she was going from hostel to hostel with this child. And we were able to, fortunate enough to have a little bit left over to give her some money to boost her quality of accommodation. And at that point, we soon got through our own finances. I'm like, heck, what do we do next? Because there's such a, I was reading the New Testament, actually the widows and the way in which the church is there to serve the community of which it holds, it looks after and then beyond, was actually, well, how do we keep this up? Because our own household finances are really stretched. But actually, it just got to a point of actually thinking, well, let's divert part of our tithe. And we were in a situation to be able to do that. And then over many years, it was about 4 or 5 years, we continued to be able to support her, to try and give her that little bit extra, to basically give her and her daughter that extra level of comfort. And all said and done, she got a big payout at the end of it. well, she lost her husband, but it was it's all in perspective. And then she came back and said, well, what is it that we borrowed? Can I give it back to you? And throughout that journey, said, no, this is how we serve God. This is how we serve God. It is yours. It's not coming back to us. She comes from a completely different faith background and was blown away by that our attitude and perspective to what we've received, how willing we are to give it away. Willing, it's not always easy. I must say that. It's not always easy to make those calls because especially around times when we're like upgrading our mortgage and think, well, the mortgage advisor's like, why do you give so much away? Look, cancel that and go for a bigger house. So there's things that come along. So that moment was particularly to help our friend through that season of hardship was really important. But there's been other times when you're just sort of tempted to go, oh, fine, all that goes off to church or other givings. Well, that'd be a nice holiday if you add it all up. Or it's an extension or a replacement car. But actually, it's kept me humble. It's kept my feet on the ground, and I've needed that.
Yeah, I love that. And what a blessing to be able to bless other people as well. I think, sometimes we don't think about that, the blessing that we get back as a result of giving. I'm sure that family, no doubt, still think about the blessing that your family was to them. Is there any one thing that maybe stands out that God has taught you personally in your giving journey?
There have been, when Georgie and I, well, you notice my accent isn't local. So about 14 years ago, we left the southeast to support friends launching a church. And so we left two stable jobs. And for me particularly, it took me a long time to build back to a reasonable level of income. And during that season, when we were starting out new jobs, trying to find accommodation, building a church community, there were times when things were really lean. But God, it's just moments where the Goodlets have shared some of this more recent testimony, where actually a package has just come through the door. And you're like, where did that come from? Who's just dropped that through our door? Moments like that where you just think, yeah, it's got to have been God's given someone a nudge, move their heart.
I love how God works like that. I'm sure many of us have that experience as well, that I feel like sometimes he likes to work in ways that there's no way that anyone else can be glorified except him. It's amazing. Thank you, John. Joel, shall we move on to you?
Yeah, sure.
So can you help us understand a little bit more about our finances right now, what's going on in the life of the church?
Yeah, sure. To set the scene for that, it's probably worth saying something simple in general about churches and charities, and then something more specific about our situation, the stage that we're at in the life of our church. And then we could probably just name a few numbers that might help to understand where we're at as well. So firstly, if you have managed budgets in your professional and personal life, most of us will have done that just for our own household or our own lifestyle. And some of us might feel like we're brilliant at that, and others of us might feel like we're always like trying to make sense of it. But then, generally speaking, we might have had situations in our professional life as well where we've managed budgets. And a lot of our perspective on that will sometimes come from what type of work we've done. So some people are largely self-employed and run their own businesses. Other people might work in the public sector or the private sector. Some people might have experience of working in charities. So if you are in public sector or charities, and the same would apply to churches, it's a little bit different to if your professional experience is mainly like a business where there's a small number of decision makers. So when you are receiving and using money in a public institution, it's one of the good things about the UK is that we have accountability. And so you'll know this if you've kind of been involved in charity sector or churches in the past, that if your basic understanding is that if we've got money and we can just use it for whatever we want, that's not exactly the way it works in charities and in the public sector. So you will sometimes get restricted funds, which means that you get given certain amounts of money, but you are accountable to use them for certain things. You can't just decide that you're going to use them for whatever you think, is the need in front of you. And so all churches and charities have a combination of that. They'll have some restricted funds, and that might be money that's been given to them by individuals or that they've received through grants. And therefore, you have responsibilities that you have to spend those in certain ways on certain things. And then churches and charities can also get unrestricted funds as well, where they sort of get given certain amounts of money, and then they'll have a group, like at our church, it's the PCC and the leadership, who will then make sure that they're making transparent decisions about how to use those unrestricted funds. So as a church, we have that. That's our picture. That's how it works. Another dynamic when you're kind of a relatively new church is that in the Anglican church, sometimes when there's a new plant or a new initiative, then the diocese might give you certain things to help you when you're setting up. And so as a church, we've had something called the SDF fund, which is pretty much exclusively to be used on the building. So you will have seen some of that money spent on our building over the last few years. And again, it's not just you can't just kind of have it and use it however you want. You have to go through different stages of consultation and be accountable and transparent in how you use that money. But that money's given for the first 5 years in the Anglican Church. So we've just kind of passed that time. And so that's all been part of the picture of the first 5 years. So combined with what different people give when they feel moved to be generous to the church or to give, we've also had those things going on. And we're just at the point where that's changing a little bit. One more thing to add into the picture is when you're part of the Church of England, because the Church of England's a national organisation, and we have various things to support local churches at the diocese level, then the diocese will also ask local churches to make a contribution to that kind of central pot. And that allows the bigger diocese to help us with things like making sure that we're following all the legal procedures that we should, being at the end of a phone if we've got various different issues or support that we need, and just making sure that there's kind of spiritual oversight and people to be there for those who are leading this church and helping us with different things. So all of that goes into the background. And where we're at as Lighthouse is that when we came into this year, just to give us a kind of a current picture, rather than the last 5 years, not so relevant right now, we'll go into this in more detail for anyone who's interested to come along to the APCM, which is coming up soon, which I'd really encourage you to come to if you can. At that meeting, we'll be able to give you more details of what we do as a church. But when we came into this year as a PCC, we were looking at quite a significant deficit in our budgets. So you will have noticed we've spent some money on the building and equipment and so on. That's different because that was the SDF money that was given to us that we could use in the first 5 years. But in terms of being able to run our normal ministries and the different things that we feel God's called us to do as a church, we were looking at a deficit of just above £60,000 as we came into 2026. So as a PCC, we obviously had lots of conversations and lots of times to pray and think about what would be the best thing to do with that. We wanted to know, God, what are you saying? How do we tackle this? Often churches and charities will start the year looking at a deficit. That's often the way that it is. When I've worked in the charity sector, most charities I've worked for do that. And so you have various, if you're in a charity, you'll normally have a fundraising strategy to try to cover your deficit through the year. And as a church, that's often the case too. But when we looked at that deficit as a PCC, we felt we really need to bring this before God and figure out what we should do. And one possible outcome was that if our picture didn't change in terms of the balance of our incomings and our outgoings, we were aware that at some point in 2026, we might have to make some quite drastic decisions. That could have been things to do with redundancies, and it could have significantly stopped us doing some of the things we really felt God was calling us to do in terms of the ministries we want to do in this local community. So we've been looking and praying as a PCC team about making some kind of smaller but more immediate savings over the back end of last year and coming into this year. So that means we're now looking at a deficit in 2026 of about £30,000. So there's still something to really pray about and consider as we go forward as a church. And really, to put sort of some numbers on that, if it's helpful to have the numbers, we sort of seem to be figuring out that during the course of a year, at the moment, with the kind of ministries that we're running, and sometimes new things start during the course of a year, so that's why the picture can be a bit flexible. But if we were to stay as we are now, doing what we do now, then the life of this church would cost about a figure of somewhere around £160,000 for a year. And that's if we don't feel that God calls us to do anything else. If you want to understand how we get to that figure, there's some really useful stuff on here that you can have a look at. You can see the breakdown. And if you want some of the actual numbers, the bottom side next to the QR code will give you a bit of detail there as well. And so it's within that picture of about 160,000 that at the moment we're looking at about a 30,000 deficit. So there's various things we can do about that, but the first thing we do as a church is we'll always just come before God and we ask him, what's on your heart? What are you asking us to do? And we try to be aware of how he wants to provide for that as well. And so that's kind of where we're at as a PCC team at the moment. We're seeking God for the year ahead. We believe there's things he wants us to do. We believe he wants us to be generous in this community as well. We don't believe he's called us just to gather a load of money so we can draw it into our church. That's not the idea. We think that we're here to be blessed in order to be a blessing for the people who live in this neighborhood. We feel that God has called us to be good news to the people in this area. And that's what we're seeking to do. But that's what we're looking at as a church. And so really we need to, over the course of this year, try to find what God is really saying to us about how we try to step into that. Because we feel that actually 160,000, that's what we're doing now. That's in terms of the ministries we run now. But we're well aware, we think God may well call us to do some other things this year. We could look to ourselves and our own deficits and our own issues, but actually we live in a moment of history where lots of families in our neighborhoods are really struggling massively. So we've got the people of Erdington and the local area on our hearts as well, and just trying to seek God to see what he might want us to do this year. So I hope that's fairly relatively clear about where we're at the moment in 2026.
My mic gone? It's really helpful to give us a good understanding, and it's encouraging actually that deficit has pretty much halved. I wonder for those, that might sound like still a huge figure for some people sitting here and, maybe hadn't been aware of that. Maybe you could give us an idea of just a few of the things maybe that the PCC have actioned as a result of that projected deficit so far to get us to that point.
Yeah, well, we've had lots of complex discussions about it, and we've prayed about a lot of stuff. Essentially, part of what that's meant is that there's the biggest cost for any charity or church is usually on salaries if people are employed. That would be the case with pretty much any charity or church you could look at across the UK and in other countries too. And so really that's where we've had to focus most of our attention. There's other smaller savings that we've been able to make by just being a bit more conservative with different events that we would usually do through the year and things like that, and some of the running costs on the building. But there's lots of that you can't do a whole lot about. There's just some fixed costs that exist. So, part of what that's meant is just in terms of our staffing, we're not probably extending people's hours as much as we would have imagined that we would have hoped to do, which would mean that in the office and for the general runnings of the church, we don't have as many man hours in the office. That's a very non-gender inclusive way to say it. Sorry about that. We don't have as many people hours in the office that we would usually want to do. You guys will have noticed that Sarah's role in maternity cover has come to an end, and there's a bit of a gap there until Ruth comes back. Part of our current financial situation just meant that we weren't able to extend that role any further to cover the gap up until when Ruth came back. And there's a few other decisions like that. The guys on the staff team have been really generous and cooperative with that and have looked at their own roles and have suggested places where they could work less hours so that they would cost less in the church. And various people on the staff team have made personal sacrificial choices to earn less this year and do less hours. But that does mean that some of the work that they've been doing, we've got to think creatively about how we cover those gaps as well. And that's essentially where most of the savings have come from. So we've really respected and appreciated the choices that people on staff team have made when they could have just fought for their corner and said, no, I'm going to just, because it can be scary, can't it, looking at your expenses and your income. So we just had some transparent conversations with the staff team, and essentially that's where most of the savings came from.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like some tough decisions have been made, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of us all that we appreciate those decisions that have been made. I don't know, Joel, whether this is a question for you or maybe Kat, whether you want to chip in as well, but you mentioned transparency there, and obviously this is the reason we're having the panel now. Why is transparency so important with church family in this moment of our growth?
Yeah, I just think transparency is always important. I've worked a lot in the charity sector and for schools, so it's not only for churches, but I think probably for churches it's even more important that we hold ourselves to a really high degree of accountability. If you've been a Christian and been involved in churches for more than a few months or a few years, then sadly you will realize that there are that people misusing money and mishandling public finances. It would be great, wouldn't it, if that never happened in the church? And you kind of feel like it should never happen in the church. But sadly, if you look around, it does. People are people, and often you'll get just really poor decisions that are made and people trying to line their own pockets, and sadly that does happen in churches too. There's been lots of really troubling examples in our city council, in local schools, and in other areas across our city life of where people haven't been held to a level of transparency and accountability like they should have been. And that's caused a lot of damage to a lot of people. There's still situations in our city that you will be aware of where, people that shouldn't be suffering the consequences are because people have mishandled public finances. For me, when it's God's house and when people are giving their hard-earned gifts and they're making that choice with their generosity, I think we should be more transparent and accountable than anybody, because what we're handling is things that have been given by God, and then they've been given by people in the name of Jesus. And I think it's just incredibly important that we are really honoring with that and that we really respect what's been done. And so I think you see that in the New Testament with the apostles. I think they hold themselves to a very high degree of accountability, and I think that's what we're supposed to do. And when that's not been done in the church, that's really grievous, and it's really important that we're honest. And I think if you're a member of this church, I think I'd always want you to know that you can ask any questions. So to us as PCC, to the leadership team, and I just think that's really crucial and important. That this shouldn't be a church should never be a place where secrets are hidden about it should be. Obviously, there's not every detail will be known by every person, but it should be a place where transparency and accountability is just part of the culture.
Yeah, totally would echo that. I think for me, in the role that I have the privilege of holding, but also sometimes anguish of seeing, is that we were aware that it was a deficit projected from about September last year. In fact, it probably rolled on from the previous year into last year. And so we saw the PCC step in with full transparency, but aware of the anguish ahead of, it's kind of like the solution to this could be some very, very dramatic decisions, as they've said, like redundancies, which in their mind was kind of the very last thing they wanted to get to. And we also saw the PCC in that time step into what is called extraordinary meetings, which isn't that they do something quite radical, it's just more that it's not a scheduled meeting. And so they poured themselves in a number of ways last year to just really hone in on the numbers and kind of understand what God was saying. So this was, I think, one of the things that has probably, it's really difficult to deliver all the information in one sitting. But there was a kind of sense that actually at some point the PCC need to come before us as the church and say what they've been having to handle, really, the decisions about the finances that have been quite complicated. And also there's a level at which we need to step in with faith, but we also need to be mindful that are we kind of doing this in the right way? Are we, have we created a model of church that isn't where God wants to go? And so I have to say, it wasn't just for the PCC in terms of transparency and then wanting to come and share. It's never been about, we need to drill into the numbers and then ask everybody for this. It's totally a sense of, where is God going? Is some of what's happening at the moment him shaking the ground and us going, hang on a minute, have we been heading in the wrong direction? And I think there's still an element of that question happening. And I think that's right. There's a discernment period across this year. But I think in terms of transparency for us as the church, if we held this to the end of the year and then went, oh, look, there's a tsunami, that's literally what could have happened. And I think the transparency moment was just come before us all and say, this is the reality at the moment. It's looking like there's a projected quite significant deficit. And we want to kind of together pray about this, together discern what God is saying, and together, actually, if we can give more, let's step in.
Thank you. Love that. I think it's helpful just to look at a couple of different points of view. I suppose if things don't change by the end of the year, what might that practically mean for the life of the church? You know, what decisions might have to be made if things don't change? Don't know who wants to answer that.
Can I answer that just from even now, and then you could go to the end of the year? But even now, so you will have heard that we've just announced our Easter gatherings. Those of you who've been tracking with Lighthouse, and Lighthouse has been your home for a while, may notice that we aren't doing Messy Easter this year. And that has been a decision that was really, really hard as a staff team, because actually we long to do it. It's one of the big outreaches. But in terms of resource, not just the financial outpouring of that event, the time it would take for staff team to do that with, we're basically in sort of, we've lost about 30 hours of staffing hours now. So we just don't have the capacity to run that event. And that, so in a sense, we're saying, as a church, this is a representation of the deficit we are facing and our means to kind of say, we're going to try and bring the income up somehow, Lord. We're going towards you. But that's the reality, is that we're having to start making some really difficult decisions. And resource where we sense is right. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky because we want to see God really move. I understand where we're at here. But I suppose on the flip side of that, if we are to see the fullness with the full budget and hopefully more, we serve a God who we know does not have a shortness of provision. If we were to see, that deficit made up and more, like what could that look like? I'd love to understand more about that vision.
Do you want to say end of the year?
I think there's, I'm conscious that it's Mothering Sunday and we're talking money, aren't we? It's not the typical service. So I just want to lighten it and maybe spin the perspective around us slightly. So one of the things that and you asked when did I experience a big change around my giving? Well, we started off with some personal testimony because we know this is around households, this is around personal people, consciously thinking, God, what is it what can my gift be? And in one sense, we talked straight into money, which is often the hardest point of giving. Giving is also around what do we do with our time and what do we do with our relationships and things like that. So as for me, putting my warden hat on and suddenly look at the big pot. We have a big pot church. I don't want anyone to think that we're leaving here going, we're all Scrooges, no one's giving anything and the church is going to collapse. The church is on a good foundation right now. Okay, when Trev looked at other churches in the area for another exercise, for our early stages, you've got the 4-year balloons around us at the moment. To be where we are at 4 years, this church has done well. So please, we haven't said that yet, but what we're looking for at the moment is what God is leading us into and stretching us into. That's where we're seeing, actually, if we're going to resource that, then that's where we've got our, we're short on budget. One of the things I'm conscious of is that this is a year to 18 months of actually seeing, well, how can we innovate? It might be that giving goes up, which we'd love to see, but it might actually be a change in generosity. It might be pivoting towards, I've got some time I can give. I've got an opportunity to give on a regular or irregular basis. So, for instance, I know Kat and I have talked about the grounds maintenance. We're currently got a grounds maintenance team coming in, but I'd look at that and go, we come at this in very different angles. All right, let's get a crew of 8 people together every other month, and we're going to just get the site cleaned up, because that would save us £1,500 a year. Okay, so we're looking at decisions like that. Not only are we saying like, can we bring a cost down, but actually can we serve? Can we change our time from, I don't have the dosh, but I have the opportunity, I have the time in my diary, or I need to move around a few things in my diary. Kat talked about Messy Easter, which will be, it's sadness to not run it this year, but I think if we don't run one next year, then we really need to look at ourselves and go, where is our time priority? Because some of these is down to a volunteer, I'm going to give of my time to be able to support something to happen. So if you're walking, I suppose, I don't know if we're going to get to a point of what is the ask before when people walk away today, but it's just to go away and weigh up. Is dosh, is it something that I can financially give to at the moment, or is there something, a time I can give to at the moment? Just go before God and say, what move in my heart? Because I know that's what's happened to, as a PCC member, before we even considered what we talked to the church, I had to go back and check my own heart, talk to my wife, like, where are we at with our giving? Are there other opportunities that we can change that? So I don't want it to be, we're not, at the end of the year, there's great opportunity to be operating church in a slightly different way.
Yeah. I think that's exciting as well, actually, to see where God is going to move, if we can all think about how we can partner with him in that. I'm conscious, do we have Okay. We got some questions.
Mike said he was going to heckle me hard, so if there's any from him, just ignore those.
Okay, so I've got a few quick fire questions here, panel, for you. So number 1, what can I do to give if I don't have much money?
That's a good question.
John, I think you touched on that slightly with time, actually.
This is just, okay, Kat's heard me, and I haven't delivered on any of this, so she's going to... But in terms of activating our voluntary aspect, there might be a few things that come out soon. This hasn't been signed off. This is just a thought bubble that may not actually turn into anything, but potentially we'll have like a WhatsApp group where we just say, look, we've got, so for instance, we received a lot of goods at Christmas because of the using up the SDF fund. These guys have been trying to unbox, assemble and reinstall things. They're behind those screens, so maybe a case of we've got a 90-minute session, the church will be open at a certain period of time, can you come and help us, give us your time if you're free, to basically do something practical within the church. So I think one of the opportunities for, if you're in that situation, is to watch out for the opportunity to serve, or maybe even come to us at the PCC and go, look, this is my gift, this is my opportunity, what may I do?
Joel.
Also, there's some guys on the PCC who are really passionate about making sure Limitless happens this year, who really want to try and help some of our young people to go. And as a church, we've usually subsidized tickets to take people. Often that's been a place where people have really encountered God, and they've joined our church afterwards, having not had a walk of faith in their life before. And so I know some of the guys from PCC are thinking about how we can mobilize them, helping the young people to do some fundraising for their tickets towards Limitless. So that'll be coming up in the next few months. So if you're aware that that's going on and you don't feel like it doesn't feel like you're in a position to be given any extra finances, then things like that could be really helpful to just jump in with and find out as those plans get revealed. I think there's going to be things like car washing and cupcake sales and etc. There might be different ways that you could help some of the guys who are getting stuck into that. That would be a massive blessing as well.
I love that. And actually, just before I move on to the next question, I feel like sometimes actually that 30,000 can feel like a huge amount to anyone listening, but actually, I've heard some figures around that being broken down over the course of the year, that actually it's not that much, So it can sound like a big figure, but, it's not about the amount we're giving at all. It's more about the heart. Second question here, do you have any thoughts or advice for anyone whose trust in churches and the way they use money has been affected by bad personal experience? That's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things across the board, isn't there? Sometimes with churches where there's pain and there's hurt. And I'd say come and speak to Trev and I. One of the things when Lighthouse was kind of being called into being was it would be a place of refuge, that it'd be a place where if there is pain and hurt, that we get to come in and just come before God and allow him to minister to us. And so I think Trev and I certainly, and I know a lot of the team, it's on our hearts to just create that space to journey. I think as best we can in terms of church finances, we're saying we're trying to be as transparent as we possibly can, but we'll hold our hands up. There may be times we get it a bit wrong, and we want to, and the PCC want to be accountable for every spend, and it has to go through quite a rigorous process with spend. I won't bore you, but for every sort of pound that is spent, depending on the threshold of spend, it has to go through tiers of agreement. So it is not just we can just Trev runs off with the card and decides to put a swimming pool in the vicarage garden, which I would love, but he's not going to do that. It's not like that. It has to go through, and even with the diocese then tier above, if we were to do a large building project, we actually have to get agreement with them. So in terms of our finances, there's a lot of accountability structure around them. But if there is pain in that place and you would like to talk it through, or you'd like ministry and prayer over it because it's hard, we would love to do that with you.
Yeah, thank you. Panel, I'm going to have to rush along because I've got quite a few more questions here. So if we can... 1 minute answers, quick fire. Next one. Can you speak about any specific church needs or funds? I don't know whether there's maybe one or two specific needs of funds.
So the Young Life's pastor's role has been funded through the SDF fund, and then that money is running out. Okay, so we've been able to apply to a couple of other grants in order to extend those roles, but then again they're only going to go a couple of extra months. So if you are a person that wants to give into a particular area like that, let us know. Or if you have a background or a desire to get involved in bid writing, because there's pots of money out in the community, but it's often the time and detail that needs to go into applying that is a real drain. So if that is one of your areas of gift or motivation, then please.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there a breakdown of how the common fund is spent? Does it cover services at the local diocese or wider C of E pot that they spend?
Is that a planted question?
Sorry, I've got the figures on that just to help us with that. So the common fund is what we as a church give to the diocese. It basically covers the cost of a vicar and also the diocese running. So they asked every church to give £94,000, which is huge and unachievable in a lot of ways. We didn't give that amount. 22,000 of that goes to train future vicars like curates and ordinands and all those bits. 63,000 covers the cost of a vicar, which is like renting a house or doing all those things. Stipend, I don't get 63,000, just in case you're wondering. And council tax, pension, national insurance, all of those things, and training and other things. 9,000 goes to the diocese in terms of like support teams, like HR, payroll, and safeguarding, and lots of other teams. So that's the 94,000 breakdown. The vicar cost is 45 is the kind of what it costs to cover the real basics of having a vicar. The extra stuff is on there to make it up to the 63. So that's what we were asked for, but we as a church get to decide how much we give. It's a voluntary one. What hasn't been taken into account yet, which will be this year, is the parish. And so we are in a poorer parish compared to just up the road, like on Sutton and Warmley and other places are more well-off. So in poorer parishes, we'll get asked to pay less, and more well-off parishes will get to pay more for that.
Thanks, Trev. Quick fire one. How does the 30k deficit compare to previous years if the financial target, and is the financial target to break even?
Yeah, I know that we've gone into what we call a faith budget in the previous 2 years, and we were looking at about 10 to 12 deficit, or we were going to project that we're going to spend more than we were bringing in, of around 10 to 12,000. So this has been a big year.
And is the target?
It has. And then I think what was amazing, just because I don't, it can end up quite flat, isn't it? Is that whilst the PCC were making decisions just in about December, Gas Street gave us and all the plants a £10,000 gift out of nowhere. So, and they've done that in other years. They've given us a gift. So, sort of immediately, God was kind of meeting some of that projected deficit. It was like, okay, great. So that kind of like bring it down as part of that gift. So we also don't know. So there's something in just praying and just leaning into where God is going. So yeah.
Thank you. Are there opportunities to provide student or work experience placements to cover various projects?
There could be. Yeah. Let's if
talk
yeah,
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come speak to us if that's you or you have a young person. See if it's an opportunity. If the common fund is 46,000 answers in deficit, can we reduce our common fund?
Okay. So yeah, we can. Like Trev said, it's a voluntary gift to the diocese to try and ensure they can provide the services to us and other churches in the area that are not as wealthy or have such a high income. So the PCC wrestled, and I tell you what, it was a wrestle over what should that figure be. All right, we come to this year as a figure of £31,500 to give to church. That represents what, 23?
Do you mean give to the diocese, just for clarity?
Sorry, what did I say?
You give to church.
Give to the diocese. Thank you, Kat. Yeah, so that's about 23% of our total income. So we really, really wrestled over what that figure be, because the figure was huge. Does that answer the?
Yeah.
So you could turn around and say, look, we can't afford it at all this year. All right, and the diocese would find other ways of getting by. But actually, we need to cut our cloth. We need to be careful and respectful with what we have. So, and to go and just say, actually, let's reduce that in order to be able to have other things that we run. It's a very much a balancing act, and it's really important that the PCC is made up of a reflection of us. So if you're here and you think, actually, what could I do? Potentially joining the PCC would be one of your gifts to us, because you've got either that heart for what God is doing in mission. It might just be, or anyway, if you have any inkling about wanting to sit on PCC with us and help us to test and weigh and work these things through, we would gladly, get you signed up.
This one, if the Church of England has billions in assets and yet Locke's church can't afford messy Easter, how are you going to respond? Who wants to take that one?
Oh, that's a difficult one, isn't it? I think the SDF funding was Central Development Fund, so it's a pot that sits in Central Church, which then dioceses can bid for. So our diocese bidded for that pot, won it, and then we here, the plant and the funding for it was out of that central pot. So there are ways and means to do that. The church centrally is very focused on revitalising mission, buildings in themselves to absorb masses of money. So I don't think the church is being, is hoarding away. I think they're looking for strategic ways, but accountable ways as well. They can't just sort of give funds, as we've said earlier, then otherwise it could end up in a bit of a mess. So, I don't really think that answers the question. It's such a big question. Maybe we need to bring that question to the Family Vision Night /APCM.
Yeah.
It's like, that would be good to speak into a bit more.
Yeah. And like you say, we are going to be going into a lot of this stuff more at that Family Vision Night coming up. There is one final question here. John, did you want to say something?
One of the questions that posed in my mind is, would we be sitting here if the deficit was so big? Well, I think the answer to that is yes, we should be. Because even if we were just looking at a shortfall, you guys deserve that level of transparency about what's going on, because it comes out of your household, your pocket. We get an income, a reasonable income off of the church hall. So I think the timing of things is awkward. We are sitting here with a larger than anticipated deficit, but I think we would sit here anyway in other circumstances. So I don't think you should take this as necessarily panic. This is why this is coming out. It's just that the message we have to deliver at this particular time is probably a bit more heavyweight than it would be in the previous years.
Okay. I think we are running out of time. There are a few more questions, but I'm thinking maybe just hold those for now. If there are other questions coming in, please do continue to send those, and we can speak to those at the Family Vision Night coming up. I think just in terms of response, before we move into a short time of worship, be helpful for those of us who've been listening. This is new information for a lot of people. What is the response here if someone wants, to look at next steps, how they can get involved?
I think one of the dangers with church, just on that, is that we can focus our attentions on going after the new thing. And I think sometimes the church has used that to kind of, we go after this, let's raise for that, let's raise funds for this, let's raise funds for that. I don't think that that is the right perspective for us to have as a church. I think there's something really significant in, particularly this year and last year, that God was doing in the darkness. Sometimes it's about our roots going down deep, and that was kind of, if you were part of that series last year, it was very much about how are we rooted, because if the Bible, we believe that is true, and I do, there are some storms to come for us as Christ's bride. And so us being transparent about the ins and outs of the working of the church at the moment, that's because we love gathering together. That's because we believe the church is the hope of the world. But in terms of the raising the finances and going after anything, I think that can trip us up. And so this is a moment for us to respond in a way that says, I love this church. I love these people. I love, and Lord, just show me what I'm meant to do. Is it that I'm responding practically? Is it that I can give what I can give? Is it that I need to reflect on my giving? And Trevor and I have done that. We've said, actually, even though I've reduced my hours, we've reduced our income, we're not going to drop our tithe. In fact, we're looking at increasing it. And that's our heart. I'm just sharing that as transparency of what we as a family unit have been looking at. But I think in this moment, if you feel like you want to give, do that. If God has said, go. But if it's more that it's like, okay, Lord, I need to mull this over, just allow him to minister to you today. We just want to be transparent rather than this tsunami come at the end of the year. And we're like, oh, what do we do now?
I really want to affirm that from PCC as well. If you could have a parting word from us as your reps on that board. What I want you to know loud and clear is we're not thinking, oh goodness, there's a shortfall, and therefore we're looking to you as a church family to somehow rescue us from that. We're not doing that. We're looking to God and asking him, what does he want to do this year? And I would just urge you to do the same. If I was going to land it on a scripture, I've been thinking of Mordecai's words to Esther, when they're facing that's a much more significant crisis than what we're talking about. But he says this really powerful thing to her where he's like, deliverance will come. God is going to, and I wouldn't say that over our church, I'd say it over Erdington and over the whole north of the city. Deliverance is coming. God is going to move in these neighborhoods, and he's going to save people. And what Mordecai says to Esther is, he's like, you could participate if you want to or not. Deliverance is going to come. But he turns it into a sense of like, do you want to be part of that? That'd be great, wouldn't it? And that's the way I'm seeing it for us. I'd want you to hear that from us as PCC. We're not worried. We're not looking to any one of you to try to dig us out of a hole or anything. We're just looking to God, and we'd want you to look to God with us. Let's just look to him and see what he wants to do at this moment, I'd say.
Amen. I love that.